Did you know about the deadliest serial killer in American history who looked like an ordinary man? For years, a silent predator moved through the shadows of Washington state, targeting vulnerable women and leaving behind a trail of horror that would become one of the deadliest serial murder cases in American history. His name was Gary Ridgway, but the world would come to know him as the Green River Killer. In the early 1980s, the area around Seattle was changing fast. The city was growing. Highways stretched farther into the suburbs, and along certain roads, prostitution had become common. Young women, many struggling with addiction, poverty, or unstable homes, worked the streets near Pacific Highway South. Some were runaways, some were barely teenagers. Many believed they were simply getting into another customer's car. None of them knew they were stepping into the vehicle of a killer. Gary Ridgway appeared ordinary. He worked as a truck painter, lived a quiet life, and blended into society so well that almost nobody suspected him. Neighbors described him as polite and calm. Co-workers saw him as forgettable. But behind that normal appearance was a man driven by violent fantasies and an obsession with control. Ridgway's childhood had been troubled. He reportedly had a complicated relationship with his mother and struggled socially for most of his life. As he grew older, his anger toward women intensified. He became consumed with prostitution, often visiting sex workers while secretly developing hatred toward them. Over time, those fantasies turned deadly. The murders began around 1982. Young women started disappearing from the Seattle and Tacoma areas. At first, police believed many had simply run away, but then bodies began appearing in wooded areas, rivers, and isolated locations. Several victims were discovered near the Green River, which is how the killer earned his terrifying nickname. The victims were often strangled. Some were posed after death. Others were hidden beneath leaves, branches, and debris, deep in forests where Ridgway believed nobody would ever find them. He frequently returned to dump sites to revisit the bodies, making the crimes even more disturbing. Fear spread rapidly across Washington state. Parents warned their children not to hitchhike. Women working the streets became terrified of every passing car. Detectives realized they were hunting someone methodical, patient, and extremely careful. The investigation quickly became massive. Detectives worked around the clock, interviewing suspects and searching for patterns. The task force handling the case eventually became one of the largest serial killer investigations in United States history. Hundreds of officers were involved. Thousands of tips poured in. Investigators interviewed sex workers, searched forests, and followed endless leads. But despite all the effort, the killer stayed ahead of them. One reason Ridgway avoided capture for so long was how ordinary he seemed. He was married multiple times, attended church, and held a steady job. He even inserted himself into conversations about the murders. People who met him rarely sensed danger. At one point, Ridgway became an actual suspect. In 1983, police questioned him after a witness connected his truck to missing women. He even took a polygraph test and passed. Investigators had suspicions, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge him. And while police struggled to solve the case, Ridgway continued killing. The body count kept rising throughout the 1980s and into the 1990s. Victims vanished without warning. Families waited desperately for answers that never came. Some parents spent years wondering whether their daughters were alive or dead. What made the case especially tragic was how many victims were overlooked by society. Many were involved in prostitution or drug addiction, causing some people to ignore the danger at first. But detectives knew a serial killer was targeting vulnerable women precisely because he believed they would not be missed quickly. As technology improved in the 1990s, investigators decided to re-examine old evidence using modern DNA testing methods. Tiny samples, collected years earlier, were finally tested again. This decision would ultimately break the case open. In 2001, nearly 2 decades after the murders began, DNA evidence linked Gary Ridgway directly to several victims. Police moved quickly. When Ridgway was arrested, the quiet truck painter who had hidden in plain sight for years suddenly became the face of unimaginable evil. Investigators were stunned by how calm he appeared during questioning. Eventually, Ridgway began confessing, and the confessions were horrifying. He admitted to murdering dozens of women. He described picking them up along highways before strangling them, often using his arm or ligatures. He confessed to dumping bodies in remote forests and returning to the scenes repeatedly. According to Ridgway himself, killing became easier over time. Authorities officially linked him to 49 murders, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. But Ridgway claimed the real number was much higher. Some investigators believe he may have killed more than 70 women. To avoid the death penalty, Ridgway agreed to cooperate with investigators by revealing details about his crimes and helping locate victims whose remains had never been found. Detectives led him through forests and remote areas as he pointed out burial sites from memory. For the families, the confessions brought a mixture of relief and pain. Some finally learned what had happened to loved ones missing for decades. Others were forced to hear the horrifying details of how their daughters died. During sentencing, emotional family members confronted Ridgway face-to-face in court. Many cried, some shouted in anger, others demanded answers that could never truly satisfy them. One moment became especially unforgettable. A grieving father spoke directly to Ridgway and unexpectedly told him he forgave him. Ridgway, who had remained emotionless throughout most of the hearings, reportedly struggled to respond. Today, Gary Ridgway remains in prison for the murders. The Green River case still stands as one of the darkest serial killing investigations ever seen in the United States. But beyond the shocking numbers and headlines lies the real tragedy, the lives of the victims. Many were young women who dreamed of escaping hardship, rebuilding their lives, or finding a future beyond the streets. Instead, they crossed paths with a predator who saw them as disposable. The Green River Killer case changed how investigators approach serial crimes forever. It exposed the dangers faced by vulnerable communities and showed how easily predators can hide behind ordinary appearances. Even decades later, the story of Gary Ridgway remains deeply disturbing, not only because of the number of victims, but because for years one of the world's most dangerous killers looked just like everyone else. Like, comment, share, and subscribe for more crime stories history.